Go to the next slide, please. All right, so if you haven't downloaded the Poll Everywhere app yet, we're going to ask you to do this now if you can, and we'll ask you again if you haven't. This is going to be your interface for some rapid polling that we're going to do in about 30 minutes or so. You can just get that on the Apple Store or Google. Just Poll Everywhere, just download it on your smartphone. So next one, please, Leslie. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping here to get us started, right? If you're attending by Zoom, we want to have sort of a virtual sign-in. So if you're able to send a chat message to Heather, just with your name and or email, so we know that you're on the call. So you'll find her in the chat box, Heather Brannigan. As I said, download the app. This format is virtual and in person. So good to see some people in the Performing Arts Centre. Great to see some people online. It is being recorded, and we do plan to post these discussions and presentations. So if you could please mute your audio when you're not talking if you're on Zoom. Okay, that's just the housekeeping. All right, so let's go. So this is the program we've got for tonight, right? So, and we've got a 2-hour slot. We may not take that whole time. We can if the discussion's rich, but roughly the steps we want to go through, we're just going to have a little bit of an introduction and a recap from the visioning and talking about the planning implications and where we're at in the process. We then want to spend a bit of time with you reviewing the community input that's come from the community survey, and to go over in some detail the draft character areas. So this is, I think, is a really kind of interesting way to think about how does the vision translate into reality in the landscape of Smithville. So this is this character area concept. We're going to take a deep dive into some of the research. Then we're going to have some discussion, rapid polling on key issues. And then there's a little bit of work we want to do in terms of some policy and sort of diving into really understanding your sort of quite finessed views around a number of different topics. So we'll have some questions and answers to you on that, and then we'll talk about next steps. All right, so just to recap, what's a comprehensive plan? Well, it's essentially the vision and the roadmap for the future of Smithville. It guides community decision-making, and it's rooted in the community vision. And our timeline is to 2030 to match it up with the visioning process. But really it's your tool as a community to be able to start to lay out the physical formation of your community over the next 10 years. So our process here, so we've had the launch and we've been doing some background technical work. We launched obviously in January. There's been a sort of a pause in the process or a switch in the process because of the pandemic. But we've had the community survey running. Obviously we have the task force sessions now in August, or the end of August, early September. But we've also got some ideas about wanting to open this up for more community engagement. So we want to be posing a series of discussion topics to the community that come out of these sessions this week. We want to be thinking about some open sessions later on. And obviously there's going to be a chance to review and revise the comp plan. And then obviously, you know, it goes to council for approval or to the alderman. So this is the layer. So there's a little bit of sort of technical language in here that we'll talk about tonight. But I want to sort of lay out how we're building the comprehensive plan with you. So obviously the community visioning work was done, and you know, most of you were part of that. That helped identify what you might call the community aspirations. So sort of thinking about how do you translate vision into some reality. We've been working on what does that mean in terms of planning implications. So trying to get that translation between the desires the community has and actually what that means in terms of, you know, policy, land use, and all those sort of issues. The character area projections, which we'll talk about tonight, and then we're going to be talking about overlay topics, and that'll be the things that tie it all together. So the infrastructure issues and so on. That informs the future land use map, and then obviously goes through the comprehensive plan. Some things we're trying to do to make this innovative. One of the things that the selection committee was really keen on was to not to do a boring comp plan process, but to have it be one that was you know, sort of enticing for the community, and people really felt they had a chance to weigh in on it. A couple of the features of that is really building off the pillars from the vision. So we're going to be talking about, you know, the pillars for these task forces. So this having that sort of structure for thinking run through the whole process. Engaging the youth throughout the visioning particularly. Obviously, it's a little bit fraught now with the planning process, but we're still looking at how we might do that. We're also really keen to make sure this is a really visual process. You know, planning can have a tendency to become technical, and what we want to try and do through this whole process, and this is particularly where Leslie and John's skill really comes in, is to be able to translate what people are talking about into what the future might look like in terms of, you know, images and diagrams and, you know, really tangible sort of assets. And then we want to leverage best practice and work with our cohort communities. So just a quick recap. So from the visioning, we all remember this, right? This was these different scenarios of the future. Next one, Leslie. And then we talked about this, the green dots being the expected future, the blue dots being the preferred future. And essentially the whole comprehensive planning process is about how do we make sure we end up where you want to be in the blue dots and not by default end up where you don't want to be in the green dots. All right, so strategic pillars. So Leslie, next one. So you remember this, that the outcome from the visioning was we're talking about a modern community oasis designed for 2030. That's the sort of central core part of the vision, supported by these 5 critical pillars: continued commitment to education, enhanced recreation and connectivity, diverse housing and neighbourhood options, which is what we're going to dig into tonight, strengthen business and economic development, and the retention of the small town feel and sense of community. And then you'll see this as we go through, you know, as we start to post material on the portal, this whole idea of translating community aspirations into the planning implications. And then this idea of these character areas. And so Smithville's had character areas previously defined in the previous comp plan, right? And one of the approaches we're taking this time is we're sort of bringing those more to the foreground, because a lot of the visioning talked about, you know, wanting to have these sort of unique sense of community nodes inside of Smithville, and a way to be able to sort of organise planning and organise how people live, work and move through the community. And the character areas sort of really lend themselves to this way to be able to think about sort of different experiences of Smithville through different parts of it. So you can both protect what's really important in some areas, but open up other areas for new developments or new experiences that you may want. So we'll talk more in detail, but just as we go through, just think of these character areas as big chunks of Smithville. Tonight we're doing diverse housing and neighbourhood options. So next one, Leslie. All right, so these are the community aspirations that came out, the high level aspirations under this pillar area in the visioning process. So one was to initiate the comprehensive planning process. That's obviously already underway. You're part of it right now. Facilitate the availability of more diverse housing options. So there's been a lot of discussion about that, and we're going to dive into that deeply tonight. Define and develop the neighbourhood nodes, and we're using the character areas to try and really get to that. Preserve green space in the rural feel, and that will also get picked up when we talk in the pillar, which is a small town feel and community charm and so on. Next one, Leslie. So the high level planning implications. So when you think about those community aspirations and how they translate, what does that mean in terms of things we have to think about from a planning perspective, right? So one is we have to allow for residential product types that increase the number of dwellings per unit area, enhancing walkability, vibrancy of the downtown and the south area. We'll talk more about that, right? But the forecasts are, as we'll talk about, there's going to be more people in Smithville. So you have to think smart about where are those people going to live, what density is that's going to be at, what kind of housing types do we need because the world's changing and so on. The second point, straight into that, encourage the development orientated for active retirees. In the visioning, one of the things that was identified was that there's a cohort of people who have been in Smithville, raised their families, kids have probably gone, but they love the place, they want to stay, but the housing stock, that option to be able to transition to the next sort of phase of life is not there in sufficient quantity. Identifying ideal locations for infield and greenfield development while protecting green space, and especially in the northern residential areas. There's a real issue in the future you don't want, right? In the expected futures is this idea that, you know, you start to just lose green space and you start to lose that unique rural feel. So thinking about that now is really a really smart move to set yourselves up for the next 10 years. And then strong focus on this preservation of open space, buffer zones, green corridors, especially thinking about what is the Highway 169, what's that experience driving through Smithville like, and what's that relationship to the broader metropolis. So there's things that at planning implication levels and type of housing and density, that's what we're going to dig into tonight, right? So Leslie, can I hand this back to you at this point then, so that you can set us up with some of the community insights and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. David, to give you kudos, that was a very timely presentation. We talked about David sticking in with about a 15-minute intro, and we're right at 15 minutes, so excellent job. Today, again, like David kind of set us up for, we really want to start talking about housing needs in Smithville and how housing can be accommodated into the future for the city to meet not only the current needs for residents moving forward in the next 10 years, but to accommodate those that want to come to Smithville as well, and making sure that there's options and pathways for that. I want to just start the talk a little bit today, honing in on people in the community residents in Smithville. I wanted to share just some of the top level insights that we gained through the community survey. A lot of these are very similar to the conversations that have happened in the strategic planning process and at the launch, but mostly just to kind of root our conversation today in with people and with the community as we go more and more in depth in terms of housing. It's very quick to forget that people live in houses, and it's very important for the community to make sure that all are accommodated for. When we think about why people live in Smithville right now, we're hearing about the great school district, the size of Smithville being that smaller town, the convenience to Kansas City, but staying outside of Kansas City so that you have this very protected character of Smithville that's been developing over the years. And then also, of course, the proximity to Smithville Lake and the recreational assets and characters nearby. We asked in our community survey if people anticipate staying in Smithville for the next 10 years. And 75% of the people that responded in the survey said, yes, they do anticipate staying in the city. When we started diving into the answers for that other 26% of reasons why people might leave Smithville, we heard a lot from the youth, especially the high school students that anticipate moving, changing locations. Maybe some of those people will be kind of the boomerang population that goes away for school but comes back and settles down. We hear, as David mentioned too, that there's a lot of folks that would like to stay in Smithville, but as they age, there might not be the retirement communities or the housing options to fit their needs as that baby boomer cohort ages and grows older over the next 10 years, and their housing needs might change. We also heard kind of from both ends of the spectrum too, where some people hope to see that there was more growth in Smithville that has happened in the past couple of years, and they're looking for something maybe different or larger, more growth. And then on the other end of the spectrum, hearing from people that small town feel is really important, and as Smithville's growing, that it's maybe growing too large for them. So a wide range of responses. And similarly, when we think about if housing needs might change, especially based on a lot of that reasoning with that 25% who might leave Smithville, similarly, we had 3 out of 4 people indicating that they think that their housing needs will remain the same over the next 10 years. And then a pretty equal split between people who anticipated needing a larger home, maybe they're growing a family or needing to move up in size, as well as kind of that split of the people that are looking to downsize or move into either a smaller single-family home or looking for an apartment or condo, something with smaller square footage. When we think about changes in housing needs, this is often really reflected in changes in demographics. This is a national issue across the board that communities are facing. When we look at traditional housing developments, we often see that nuclear family product type that's put out, especially in Smithville, a large amount of the single-family detached homes. But we know, again, that our country is aging, our communities are aging. We'll have more and more needs for adapting to capture that aging population. We know a lot more, the 20-somethings moving back in with their parents, but might not have the home style set up where that's a comfortable arrangement. We're seeing more and more adults being single. Maybe that's a change in their family size or change in their family dynamic, or just delaying that, graduate college, get married and have a family. And then also, again, just that shrinking middle class. And I was going to do a quick poll, but I don't see everybody on the screen. So something just to keep in mind too, if like any of these issues resonate with you, or if you relate to that at all, definitely in the conversation. So as we talk about changes in housing needs and accommodating that in Smithville, feel free to bring this up. When we look at Smithville's current housing supply, this is probably not going to shock anybody, but about 80% of the housing units in Smithville are the detached single-family homes. So when we use the word detached single-family, that means one house per lot. A very small proportion of housing options that are multifamily, like apartments or condos, and about 10%, 12% of the attached single-family homes, so maybe a townhome or a duplex, triplex, quadplex. But again, that bulk majority of housing units being the single-family. As we look to the next 10 years and we ask ourselves as a group, how do we plan for housing over the next 10 years? What we're really also looking at is who are we planning for? So as we talked about, we definitely need to make sure that the housing needs of the current residents are fulfilled, but we also need to plan for future residents. As we know, Smithville is a growing city. Through our comprehensive planning process, we ran a series of population projections to kind of give us an idea of what the future might look like. Obviously, again, these are projections, but we think that the population of Smithville might grow in the next 10 years to by 3,500 or 4,500 new residents. When you think about that in terms of housing, we're estimating maybe about 1,500 new housing units, or 1,300 to 1,700. And today we're going to just really focus in on that 1,500 new housing units. And you see that need come about because as you grow as a population, of course, you have very low housing vacancy in Smithville, very strong housing market. And so that's going to mean that we're going to need to provide more houses as we plan for the future. Okay, so let's talk about that housing future. When we think through for the comprehensive plan, we've really identified kind of 5 top-level goals that correlate with planning implications and the community aspirations. First, we obviously know that we need to see an increase in the supply of housing units to meet that growing demand. We want to make sure that we're celebrating and preserving the existing housing in neighborhoods in Smithville, while also strengthening the neighborhoods across the city and all of the different areas and different character areas that you all have. We've been hearing over and over again how important recreation, walkability, connectivity is across the city as a vision for the community, but that can also be really instilled within the residential areas as we're planning for those residential areas to come. And then we want to make sure that we're providing housing options for all and for everyone and kind of meet those needs that we're seeing as best practices across the country, as well as specifically within the Smithville community for the next 10 years. So we're going to just kind of focus on these 5 goals today, and kind of I have at the bottom of the screen, feel free to kind of think about these goals too, and as we get into discussion portions later, if there's something that's missing, let's make sure to address that. So when we ask ourselves, where should we plan for these 1,500 new housing units? A big part of the comprehensive plan is to provide, again, that roadmap for the city for the next 10 years, so that when decisions are made either from a developer or at the community level, there's really that guidebook, and the comprehensive plan kind of serves as that guidebook. When we ask ourselves where these housing units should go, we're really looking at a lot of different layers of decision making, primarily that community vision and aspiration that's come about there. I'm going to keep on going. We also know, obviously, you can't just put development anywhere. We have to look through to make sure that development is feasible, that the area is either servable or currently served by the infrastructure to make sure that we're growing sustainably. We want to make sure to stay out of the extensive floodplain that Smithville's downtown has, especially. But we also want to be really cognizant, not just to the vision, but to make sure that what we're proposing is actually reflected in development and neighborhoods that could actually occur based on kind of the real estate market conditions. And then lastly, as much as we're looking to identify the places where we want to see development, we're also asking the question of where do we not want to see development, and what are the areas that we want to protect, conserve, and preserve for the next 10 years. And just keep in mind too, as we talk about these 1,500 new housing units, what we're saying is 1,500 new housing units, not necessarily 1,500 new houses. So as we look through and have further conversations on density and typology of different types of houses that could come to Smithville, or different types of housing units that could come to Smithville, that's a very big impact on the type of space and the amount of space that's required to meet that demand. So as David mentioned, in the comprehensive plan, one of the tools that Smithville's been using since their 2005 comp plan is this idea of character areas. And these are established areas across the city that fit kind of either a vision for that place. Maybe it's a similar style or has similar features or characteristics. There are 5 total character areas. What you don't see that I have highlighted, or that I don't have highlighted, is kind of an area slightly above the 169 character area, which is the most southern area, and then a hospital bluff area where the hospital and the schools are. That's pretty well developed in between 92 and the downtown. So from a planning perspective, and based on the conversations that we've had, what we've learned from the visioning work, some of our conversations with Jack and Cynthia at the city level, we've targeted kind of 3 working areas that we think would really make a lot of sense to target growth. First, we're looking at that northern residential character area north of downtown. We think that there's opportunity to incorporate more houses in this Downtown Oasis community character area. And then we think that there's an opportunity to develop a new typology in Smithville in this 169 South character area, which is, again, the southern most portion of the municipality. So we're going to just walk through kind of each of these character areas, walk through kind of the typology that we're proposing in that area based on these conversations and what we think might make sense. We'll provide like an aerial map so you can see again where we're talking about. And then we have a series of conceptual diagrams that are kind of our working analysis from bridging the realities with all of those different layers of decision making to kind of identify these places where we recommend exploring housing options. So when we first start with this northern residential character area, flip to the map real fast. We're talking about the area north of downtown. So downtown is just south of this dotted area, all the way up to Clinton County line, which is the northern segment of the municipality. What you currently see in this area is a lot of single-family homes. You're seeing new neighborhoods put in, subdivisions being put in, as well as some infrastructure for trails and connectivity and pathways, and a fair amount of open space, either actively being used for agricultural purposes or lower density housing areas or developments. And what we think here is there's a very strong market demand for adding new houses in this area. Of course, Smithville's housing market is very strong. People want to move to Smithville for the school district. And we expect that that's going to continue for the next 10 years. When we look at this area, we see again these kind of clusters of subdivisions kind of throughout this character area, as well as that large amount of open space or agricultural land. And when we get into our conceptual diagram of the character area, what we're really looking to see is that we see this really strong opportunity to prioritize areas to fill in the residential neighborhood gaps that can help strengthen the community, help it connect these neighborhoods to create stronger neighborhood nodes overall, and provide pathways and recreational activities, opportunities through these neighborhoods that would ultimately connect to the Smithville Lake Trail and down to the new Main Street Trail to connect to the downtown through walking or jogging or biking. So the areas that we have in yellow here are these areas where we think that there's a strong opportunity to prioritize new residential development. The lighter yellow is where current residential developments or subdivisions already occur. Obviously, the school sits right in the middle. The elementary school sits right in the middle of the Eagle Parkway. We have a natural buffer through this area. You can see on the aerial. And then we're proposing trying to conserve as much of this area as possible. Obviously, this again is kind of the vision. It's not necessarily what would happen in reality, but we think that promoting this residential spine through these connectivity opportunities would really create an exciting, attractive Smithville. Similarly, when we go to this Downtown Oasis community area, what we see in this neighborhood so far, in this character area so far, is a fair amount of residential single-family homes, a little bit of higher density residential development, opportunities for residential development to occur nearby, but also, of course, your historic downtown and opportunities to maybe fill in the gaps, provide some infill housing, maybe push the density a little bit. We'll be talking about that today. And again, promoting that idea of walkability, creating a vibrant downtown Smithville to live, work, and play. When we go to our concept map, again, this area in green, there's very extensive floodplains in and around this area, but also a lot of opportunities for new pathways and connections, especially with the Main Street Trail connecting to Smithville Lake that runs from the historic downtown. We think in the future, over the next 10 years, there's a great opportunity to propose more mixed-use development. Maybe that's residential units above commercial units or commercial buildings that exist. Maybe it's kind of infilling some of the vacant lots with higher density residential. And then lastly, if we go down to the bottom of the Smithville, or the southernmost portion of the city, to the 169 South character area, we think there's an opportunity to really encourage a new typology of residential uses in Smithville, that idea of modernizing the community oasis, and looking to maybe potentially explore higher density residential development, which is something that we've heard at the launch. We heard this in the visioning work, that there's an opportunity to create this new product typology to meet the growing energy from Kansas City that's moving up, to establish a gateway into Smithville, and again, also even tap into that Metro Green trail network that's proposed over the coming years. What you see right now at this character area is a lot of open space. We see important areas of vegetation that can serve as buffers and kind of hold this character area in. That's important to preserve. But we also see development possibility here. The areas that we've highlighted in pink are areas that we think could potentially become mixed-use developments or higher density residential development. As you see kind of in the aerial pockets of residential neighborhoods east of Highway 169, with a strong opportunity to encourage that at a higher density. And that could potentially even bridge across to the west side of 169. This area is going to be also one that we talk about in economic development, as we see this could potentially also be a great place to incorporate office parks or different types of commercial uses too. So that's a little bit up in play. And David, is there anything else that you'd like to chime in on the character areas or the visions for the character areas? We're going to be doing some rapid polling.
Yeah, so Leslie, I will, and I'll set that up when I set up the questions for each of the character areas, because I want to revisit those, because I know we're going through it fast for people, so I want to kind of go back. So we're going to just switch mode here for a second, and we want to do some rapid polling, right? So I'm going to just share my screen so you can, all right. All right, okay, so we're going to do some live polling, and this is a way we want to sort of get some real-time feedback on a range of issues around these sort of emerging character areas and sort of concepts about what they might look like and issues of housing density and so on, right? So assuming everybody's downloaded the app, if you haven't, probably want to do that really fast, right? So when you downloaded it, it came up and said for you to register, right? So I think it's the middle button in the app. And you register, so it's the pollev.com will be there, but the login for this is FIQ124. Okay, so if you log into that, that should then put you into a holding pattern waiting for me to initiate the deck. If you're going to do it by text, then you text FIQ, capitals, not FLQ, FIQ124, you text it to 22333, and then that'll also load you into the polling. So we're going to do a question just to get everyone set up, right? So the first question is, do you live in Smithville, right? So you just reply to that and we'll make sure it's working for everybody. So looks like it's pretty stable. So I'm not sure how many people are, is anybody having any trouble logging in on this or working on the app?
Yes, I am. This is Cheryl. When it goes to register, it asks me to put in my email, but it can't find me. When it first comes up, it just says it needs a username to join. What would that be? The FIQ124?
No. Username is just put your name.
Okay.
Yeah, so you just register yourself. You can even just put a bogus name if you want, but.
Well, this isn't at the registration. This is at the home. Should I be on the registration screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let me move over.
You're on the app, right?
Yes, I am in the app. I'm on the registration screen. I put in my username, but it says it can't find my account. I'm sorry. If you don't want to worry with me, just go on and we'll.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you, Cheryl. I didn't know that you had to create an account, because when you download the app, it then just asks you to join a presentation.
Yes, that's what it did. So
yeah.
Yeah. So you can, if you go into the app, it's where it says registration, you can create an account, right? It says log in and sign up.
Sign up.
But I don't think you actually have to do that. I think you can maybe you do, yeah.
If you go to the home screen and where it says pollev.com/username, you put in the FIQ.
Yeah.
I can, okay. Let me do that then.
Yeah, I tried that and it didn't work, but let's try that.
Try just hitting the button right in the middle.
It just says presenter not found.
Yeah, mine does too.
Is anybody actually on it though? Is it working for anybody?
Has anybody?
Some people have responded.
I'm on it. It's working.
You have to create an account and then you enter in the FIQ124. Worked for me.
So you have to go to the sign in and set a whole password and everything first.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep, there's 1, 2, 3 fields to fill out. 4. Just give you a minute to do that.
Cheryl, make sure you hit the button that says sign up, not log in when you go to that page.
Yeah, I thank you, Jack. That's what I realized I had to do. Well, dang, it still says it's not a valid email. That is. Let me try again. Jeez.
For any of you attending more than one task force, you'll be all set up. It'll take a little bit of ramp up time.
You might have to log into your email and verify your email account.
Oh, yeah, that's it, true. I set up on Friday and didn't.
All right. So if anybody can't, so I can set you up to do this again later, right? So, but I just want to,
Okay.
for those who are on, right? Everybody is ready, right? So let's go to the next question, right? So this is where we're going to start to dive into some of your thoughts, okay? So we know family and society are changing. Who do you want moving to Smithville over the next 10 years, right? So, and there's, in this case, you can select the A, B, C, D. You can strong focus on school-age families, a mix of families and active retirees, a broad mix of families, active retirees, and young working people. All are welcome, or no one. And you can change your response too if you want, right? So we'll let that run for a bit. All right, okay. So can you guys all see the results on the screen? Yeah, okay. So pretty interesting this too, the all are welcome but it's interesting that typically or historically Smithville's been very strong on the school age families. One of the things we did hear a lot through the visioning was this appetite to broaden the type of profile of people in the community. And you can see that there in the all are welcome, and then the 29% of people in the broad mix of families, active retirees and young work people. So building different layers to the community. All right, good. So we'll go to the next one. So Smithville is an easy commute to Kansas City. So in the long term, what impact do you think COVID-19 will have on Smithville's appeal? Will it make it A, much more attractive? B, you might initially get some more people, but you don't really expect a huge change? Or C, it won't change any major trends? Or D, not sure? Okay, we should keep playing for a bit. All right, so we have kind of a strong lead on makes Smithville much more attractive. Anybody want to just volunteer why you thought it makes Smithville much more attractive in the long term?
I'll gladly take that one on.
Okay.
So I can tell you, I live in Harborview, so I'm in the North Residential area. And a few months ago, right when all this was starting, the whole COVID thing was unraveling and such, the traffic that is on 180th Street just to get to the lake from 169 has increased exponentially. Now, does that mean people are necessarily residing in Smithville? Not necessarily at the moment. However, there is a significant influx of people that are trying to escape, trying to go outdoors, all the things that have been promoted. And because of that, we're seeing an influx in Smithville at the moment.
Okay, right. Interesting perspective, right? So anybody want to talk to who had a view that it won't change any major trends? Anybody want to have a go at that? All right then. Okay, so let's go to the next one, right? So, hang on a sec. All right. So this is validating some of our research and assumptions. So as Leslie said, with the forecast is Smithville's population is projected to increase by 2.3 to 3% per annum for the next 10 years. So 3,500 to 4,500 new residents. Do you think we won't hit that growth rate? Seems about right. Might be a bit more than what the projections are saying, or we could actually see a bigger bump. Interesting. All right. Okay, good. So this is a good kind of straw poll exploration. So Leslie, we might have to think about some of those forecasts and give some higher scenarios. All right, looks like
Jeff made a good point.
Yeah.
Jeff made a good point in the past too. When we think about, especially that 1,500 residential unit, we split that off into 10 years, about 150 residential units a year, which is about the size of maybe an average subdivision that you see in new development too. So that helps translate what that might mean for reality too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that plays into that is if the type of people or the family size or the household unit size that's coming to Smithville changes, if it's more like active retirees or young professionals or, you know, and it's not family size, that might be more units for the same extra population. All right, so let's dive into the next one. All right. Overall, the emphasis is to have new houses concentrated in key areas across Smithville and predominantly on the eastern side of 169, right? Do you think that approach makes total sense, helps concentrate neighbourhoods and development? Or do you think we should be flexible to whatever developers want to do, or we don't know? Yeah, this is interesting, right? Looks like most of you have voted, and you know, and this was really the sense we had through the visioning too, is that, you know, Smithville has been to some degree a developer-led city. You know, proposals come and they, you know, developments go ahead, and you're sort of at that point, which is, you know, really to think about retaining the character or just to guide the development you want to go, to have a little bit more of some guidance, but obviously you have to work with the developers. But I think this data here reflects what we were hearing there as well. All right, so we want to now dig into a couple of these sort of character areas. And on the left-hand side there is the map of the character areas. And we want to start with this north residential character area. You'll see the character areas actually through the length of Smithville abut each other, right? So they adjoin. So there's 5 major character areas, and then the areas that aren't in character areas are sort of green space at the moment, and we expect them to remain green space through the course of, you know, the next 10 years. So we want to talk about this north residential area that Leslie touched on. So the question here is, the north residential character area is proposed mostly single family, detached or attached homes. Does this reflect your desire? Do you think, yes, it should be focused on family housing, particularly focused on family housing? Or maybe we should have some modest density infill? Or no, we should be much more flexible in housing typology options? So like, let's have at it. So A, just really strongly focused on family housing. B, maybe a little bit of density infill. C, open it right up. All right, let's jump it around a bit. So let's have a couple of comments here, if we can, on people who answered on B. What's guiding your thinking on that maybe there could be some more modest density infill? What purpose would that be serving from your perspective? Somebody who answered B would be willing to offer some conversation.
I'll jump in on this one.
Okay.
You know, one thing, just kind of some notes that I jotted down. I think that everybody at least should take into consideration that when we demand a certain area be left as green space, you're simply raising the development cost for that tract of land. We hear a lot of people talk about how expensive lots are, and if we demand, I think there's areas that should be a little more flexible, in particular that northern sector. And the other, I think the ideology of thinking that farming is going to stay amongst all the houses is probably not. It's a bit of a daydream, I would call it. As a matter of fact, we do a lot of the farming up in that northern sector. And just last week, we were trying to apply chemical with planes, and the residents called the FAA on us. I had to shut that down. So a lot of times the agriculture does not actually mix with your housing. So I think there are definitely areas of Smithville that just the character of the land allows that landscape to be left and undeveloped. But I think you really need to think seriously about some of the areas that we can fully develop. Is that really wise use of the land to try to leave it as green space?
Yeah, that's a good comment. So there was somebody else jumping in on that as well?
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, if I could, I wanted to highlight to Dirk that I think the critical thing you need to keep in mind is Leslie specifically mentioned that the areas outside, or David mentioned the areas outside of the proposed development areas likely won't develop in 10 years. Doesn't mean they won't ever develop. It just means 10 years.
My thought as well, and what I think is important and we need to remember, is the revenue that single family homes bring into our community, more than the green spaces by far. And it also brings in more taxing revenue for our schools. So I think we are going to have to focus on, single family homes as well as multi-family homes.
Yeah, this is I think a really interesting discussion for the community, because it's that, we really kind of work pretty hard on this in the visioning too, which is this, this desire for, the sort of rural feel, small town, that sense of community, something a bit special outside the city, and getting that balance right so that you don't, inadvertently develop away what you love, right? And at the same time, you want to be able to still build prosperity and vitality, and because that sort of growth has been what's fueling the community and has built a lot of the infrastructure and so on, right? So getting that, so what we're sort of probing in these questions is to try and find where that right balance is, so that you can lay down the 10-year trajectory to try and get you the most sensible way forward. All right, so let's keep it.
And actually, David, I might interrupt you real quick. We have a couple comments that are kind of in the comment box that,
okay, right, okay,
that are relevant. The first, just quick, is how are we defining green space? Maybe Leslie, if you don't mind, or David, either one.
Yeah, no, Sean, that's a really great question. And when we use the green space in these character areas a lot, that is something that we are diving deeper into in the comp plan. Today, we talk about green space primarily under a few different lenses. It could be active agriculture lands. It could be areas that are highly vegetated or have that natural state to them. It could also just mean single family rural lots where it's maybe a home on a 10 or 15 or 20 acre parcel where the majority of the land is quote unquote green around that farmhouse or a single house. David, did you have anything else to offer in to define green space?
John might have had another comment there.
Yeah, another question, just kind of frame things, especially when we talk about typologies and different type of housing. how much affordable housing or Section 8 housing is there currently? And I might kick that to, if you happen to know offhand, Leslie, but also maybe to Jack, who might be able to answer that more specifically as well.
Jack, do you have an answer? That's a great question.
And if we don't know
Yeah, I
internally,
need to get that.
get back to you quickly on that. I don't know that offhand either.
As it relates to Section 8, I'm only aware of one relatively small apartment complex. Now, if there are individual homes that are subject to it, that's up to the landlord to bring that forward. But we have one apartment complex that is Section 8, and then we have 2 others that are public housing related, either senior, 3 actually, that are either senior housing or a combination that are associated with some form of assistance.
All right, good. And just to sort of tie the loop on this one too is we've posted the character area maps and descriptions on the portal as well. So you can go and, I know this is just an introduction and the concept and the, perhaps some of the draft.
Already broken.
And so what we want to do is make sure that you get a chance to look at that, but obviously we're just trying to tease some initial reactions here, right? So let's go to the next question. So again, this is the Northern Residential Character Area, right to the point we've been talking about. So what do you think the overall experience and feel should be when we look at 10 years? Should we retain lots of green space in rural areas with scattered developments, allow more infill with developments to create continuous and connected housing, focus on concentrated cluster development with a mix of housing, green space and amenities? Yeah, interesting. All right, so we're really strong on C there, which is this, and this actually reflects some sort of trends around cluster development where you get these sort of concentrations of development. And we're going to talk more about that, aren't we, Leslie, later on? So, all right. All right, good. And also the results from these polls too, we're going to post those as well. So you'll have access to this. So I can see people are still changing their mind or something. All right, so good. Okay, so that's that one. Now let's go to this one. So we wanted to talk a little about the Downtown Community Oasis, right? And to give you a little bit of a context for this, the sort of core theme that emerged out of visioning was this idea that people felt like Smithville was this oasis, right? And so one of the ideas was to define quite deliberately this concept of an oasis in different ways, right? And when we started to dig into it, people really saw this whole kind of downtown area, and we'll talk more about this in one of the other task forces, but this sort of the historic downtown precinct, through to the lake, the recreation areas, some of those sort of interesting older housing developments that are around there, that really represents the heart and soul of the community, where people come and, the Main Street being redone and the, sort of community events and so on, all sort of happen in this sort of space, right? But it's also an area where there could potentially be some interesting different types of development, so that fill that gap for like young professionals who are looking for live work options, or active retirees who want walkable communities, that they might be able to have a condo and walk to the lake or get on the trails or something like that, right? So this area, this sort of character area becomes quite interesting from that perspective. So we have a couple of questions we want to ask you about this one. So the Downtown Oasis Character Area, mix of infill, moderate density, single family homes, a mix of infill and moderate density single family homes. Does this reflect the community's desires? Yes, this is where we can have live and work and retiree options. Maybe we could have higher density infill. No, we should be much more flexible in the typology, or I'm not sure. So are we all thinking the same thing? Oh no, we've got some change, right? Yeah, that's interesting, that B one too, right? Because that's what we're going to really have to probe is, how dense could that be? What's the intensity of that development? And again, Leslie will be showing some photos, and John too later on, you know, to test your reactions to what things might look like in reality. All right, good. So we'll go to the next one. So in the Downtown Oasis Character Area, what is the overall experience and feel you'd like to see looking out? Retain lots of green space and open areas with scattered development, strong heritage core surrounded by a mix of commercial and residential infill, broad, vibrant mix of historic downtown, mixed housing, green spaces, community amenities. Okay. All right, it's pretty clear, and I think that reflects actually a lot of the discussion through the visioning about what's the possibility of the downtown. I just, you know, somebody who's worked with the community now for a year and a half, I do think that the downtown is such an exciting canvas for a community, and, you know, and to see things like the main street and the trail going in out to the lake. I mean, I think it seems to be getting that area right is really going to sort of hold the story about Smithville really strongly. All right, so I'm going to go to the next question, right? So we're now going to talk about this South Character Area, right? And Leslie gave us a bit of an overview on this. This is sort of a bit of a greenfield sort of a proposal, right? Because there's not a lot of development down in that whole strip, but this is, again, trying to think about where does that 1,500, 2,000 units in the future go? And so we want to probe some thoughts on this. Okay, so the 169 South Character Area, as we're calling it, is proposed to be a higher density multifamily or mixed use. Do you think that reflects the community desires? Yes, this is where we can have mixed live, work, professional space options. Maybe we could have some high density or commercial infill. No, we should be much more flexible in typology, right? So if you could start from scratch, what do you think this should be? Okay, good. So this is interesting. So we're going to test what higher density multifamily or mixed use might look like. You know, what version of that might appeal to you most in a little while. Just have a couple more questions, right? So I'm just going to go to the next one. Thanks for jumping onto these, guys. In the 169 South Character Area, what should be the overall experience and feel? So thinking about that. So should we retain lots of green space and open buffers with scattered development? A vibrant, bustling, dense residential area connected to trails and amenities? Modern professional office park feel with clusters of high density housing? And actually C is a lot what John will talk about this too. You know, he uses the term sort of flex planning or flex development, right? So to allow, you know, this idea of having these mixed professional establishments in amongst sort of different types of higher density housing and so on. Okay, a couple of questions left, right? So in the 169 South Character Area, what should be the experience and feel of the new development be from the highway, right? So one of the things that people have talked a lot about is this entrance into Smithville as you come in, right? So do you think new development should serve as a gateway, engaging the highway with residential buildings abutting the corridor? It should be a corridor segment, or the corridor segment should be commercial with residential buildings behind retail and office. Or we should leave it feeling much the same as it is as we drive down there. Okay. Pretty clear response there. Okay, I'm going to do the last question here, right? One of the things that people talked a lot about was environmental issues in the visioning. So how important should environmental considerations be in new housing development? So talking about materials, waste, renewable energy, all that sort of stuff, right? Critical, should be considered in every new building or repurposed building. B, important, but reality should dictate application. Or C, leave it to the developers in the marketplace. Or D, not sure. Interesting. All right, good, okay. All right, fantastic. All right, so Leslie, can I pass this back to you now? And as I said, the results from these polls we'll post those to the portal as well. This is just really great. I mean, we'll have some discussion obviously about as we go through the rest of the material today, but these rapid polls are a really great way to get your sentiment and kind of, you know, to sort of tease away at some key issues. So thank you. So Leslie, can I pass it back to you?
Yes, and if you can, perfect. I was going to say, stop sharing your screen and I'll take over. So, okay. Perfect. So what we want to spend the next couple of minutes doing is really talking more about density and more about the aesthetics that we're looking for, the typology that we're looking for, and just want to go through some examples of what development might look like and kind of hear some reactions and response to that. Again, just to bring up those kind of housing goals and these neighborhood goals for the pillar. When we think about celebrating, preserving the existing housing in neighborhoods and strengthening those neighborhoods and encouraging walkability and connectivity in residential areas, a lot of that can be solved or addressed through those vision maps and potential land use maps in the area with the character areas. But we want to spend some time thinking through how the comp plan and how Smithville can address the increasing supply of housing units that are needed and providing housing options for all. When we think about what tools cities have, especially through zoning and planning, these parts of the city play a really big role in helping provide housing options for communities. We see that through providing different density levels, different occupancy levels, having parking and minimum unit sizes as controls. But what we really want to talk about is this idea of density. And I am always like floored every time I've been working with Smithville too about how eager people are for density. I know when John and I work in a lot of communities, density can be a bad word and people automatically shut down. And so it's again, like so insightful to see in those rapid polls, people really looking for density. And that's really needed too. When we think about kind of the range of housing types that can be provided in cities and in communities, we see everything from this low density, even lower density of the detached single family homes or rural homes, all the way up to mid-rise and even in cities and more urban places where you see high rises. What we don't see a lot naturally occur in cities is this idea of the missing middle. And that's looking at, again, like either those attached developments of the triplex or the quadplex or fourplex or smaller apartment buildings all the way through townhomes up to kind of these live work ideas or even this mid-range development that we see kind of on the left-hand side. And we know by providing more of the different types of housing, we can provide options for a wider range of people with this housing. And so when we take that spectrum of density and typology and we think about, again, those character areas of the visions of those character areas and the ideas and community aspirations within each of those areas, we kind of do this diagrammatic checkpoint too, where we see, like, again, in the North residential area, continuing to provide the single family or even the attached, a little bit higher density development patterns, checks that point off. When we look about those infill opportunities and strengthening the density of the residential character of the downtown area, we can even expand the typologies of housing being offered. And then in that 169 South character area, while we're really excited, and I think the group seems to be very excited about this live work, mid-rise typology. We do know that the strong housing market in Smithville encompasses all types of housing in the areas immediately around this character area, and particularly does have that range all the way down to the single family home. And again, so we want to really talk about kind of this range of housing typology and this idea of density, and bringing this. I have a series of photos of different types of developments and styles of developments and densities of developments that I'm going to walk through pretty quickly, and then we can open up the conversation too. And again, this is about exploring new housing types for Smithville and looking at what we want to see in the city and what the implications then are on for the city. When we think about this downtown area, we've heard the words infill housing a lot. We've seen this idea of higher density. Some of that can still be accommodated through the single-family detached typology, but maybe that means smaller lot sizes, smaller front yard setbacks, more of a cottage-style home. Maybe you have a stronger kind of front porch community with your garages tucked in off of an alleyway network. This can look like a lot of different typologies too. So maybe it's, you know, something similar like this, or you see those, again, smaller footprint homes that you can accommodate more houses in a downtown through that typology. Could be, again, the attached single family, maybe a more traditional home style or modern style, again, getting more units into a smaller footprint at a higher density. If, you know, is 4 stories too much for Smithville? Is that preferred over this idea of 2 stories? I have a series of pictures to kind of get to the heart of this higher density idea for the South, especially in the 169 character area, thinking through how can density meet the surrounding area and still fit in with that natural buffer. Should there be commercial uses? We heard from the poll that idea of the live work, having commercial frontage on 169 still with residential units above. Is something like this too dense for Smithville? Would something like this be desirable for that high density idea or higher density idea? As we've heard over and over again, the importance of providing aging in place options through age-restricted communities. That can mean anything like the cluster style, smaller footprint, single-family cottage homes, all the way up to a more dense retirement apartment building or condominium building that has, you know, 3 or 4 stories, and they have more apartment style units. Here's another example of an age-restricted building. This one was more on a campus with other health and wellness options or extended care of life options. Again, the density in 169 area, maybe we push that to 4 or 5, maybe 6 stories of development. Here you see in the aerial a very dense cluster of buildings kind of central around this mini oasis, even with a green space in between all these units. It's kind of an urban park feel. It's again a similar style, but a little not quite as high. Instead of 4 or 5 stories, again looking at the 2 stories. And again, another option of higher density, getting more residential units in on a smaller footprint. The aerial construction photo kind of lends itself to, again, that kind of central courtyard idea of, I'm assuming that pool is kind of sitting in the middle too, with these higher units surrounding an internal oasis.
And I want to chime in just on a broader perspective, because I know always seeing images of density can be alarming. And just to kind of frame this, and Leslie really said it, this is, again, exploring, you know, most of these typologies wouldn't be able to locate in most of Smithville, nor would we want them to locate in most of Smithville. This is really saying there's a certain type of development for a certain type of user that would allow certain things, like whether it's live work, whether it's active adult communities or housing for elderly or housing for different types of demographics or lower incomes or younger folks, and being able to concentrate that and saying, okay, we're going to enable this type of development if it's feasible, and here in the lower area is the right place for that within Smithville.
Thank you. While we talk about this higher density and this idea of multifamily and that higher density, we also can look at a wider range of unit types in that product development too. This example, it has some of the apartment buildings, the gateway or entry point into the residential development, but they include a wide mix of typology, where in the kind of the back, you can start to see back here, smaller townhome style or less dense townhome style units. So provide a range of densities within a single footprint. And I thought this example does a great job of providing an option of what it might look like off of 169. So this building, for instance, is a little bit more of a modern take than some of the other examples or comps that we've shown. But here you're seeing this front, a major roadway, provide that density right up front too, rather than tucked around. Again, another 4 or 5 story development that has a little bit more of an urban feel. It's, you know, that similar idea of mini oases seems to be pretty relevant within a lot of these developments. So keeping some of these product types in mind, again, just to kind of be able to point to some photos of when we use words like density and typology, having some reference points too for our discussion. We know, obviously, depending on how dense and how intense the units are provided in Smithville, that's going to really impact the amount of space that's going to be needed to develop and accommodate those residential uses. So as you go from a more conservative, low density all the way up to providing a really high density, you can almost accommodate all of those units in a much, much tighter or smaller footprint, leaving more area for the future of Smithville to either be protected or conserved or remain developable in the future. And we wanted to just present everybody, and this is kind of the ending point of the PowerPoint, so we can open it up for discussion, kind of a range of how we can spread density throughout the city, provide new housing over the next 10 years. So as you see from this range, and I hope everyone can see kind of this legend down here at the bottom of the screen. Are you able to see that where we have the color-coded legend? Perfect. Sometimes I feel like Zoom cuts off the PowerPoints. So when we think about what we want to target for growth over the next 10 years, that can go all the way from saying we don't want new density, which is, again, not what we've been hearing from folks, but I wanted to still provide that pathway, and realizing too that if you provide all of those single family homes on a more rural character, almost, you know, 20% of Smithville would be needed to accommodate that conservation scenario. If Smithville continued to grow at the current rate without interjection through the comprehensive plan or without guiding developers through some decision making, what you might see in the status quo is, again, that like 80% single family detached with some townhomes or attached duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. And when we start introducing this idea of multifamily, we provide kind of 3 different splits of a little bit of multifamily and density, a little more, and mostly that high density. And we'll see, like, at the bottom of each of these some like rough calculations too on what does this mean in terms of the amount of space that would be needed to accommodate that growth. And David or John, did you have anything else to chime in specifically either on these ideas of the spread of density or on any of the you know, images or product comps that we showed today?
Just one thing I just would add to that, Leslie, is that I think the sort of questions that we have to wrestle with as a task force, right? So over the next month, as we start to sort of wrestle with this and sort of drill in and come up with more precise recommendations and policy, I think exactly what you said, Leslie, which is there's two things. One is where does it occur, like the spread, right? You know, sort of where do these, you know, sort of, I guess, developments or opportunities go? And then this density, because the density thing really, as your photos show, has a big impact on the feel and the character, right? And the feel and the character is something that's really important to people in Smithville. And obviously other task forces are going to be working on that as well. And we've got some great data in the community survey and so on. But there's this sort of, and the sort of wraparound piece of that is that the desire of the community is to see this sort of modernization of the community and its relevance. So it's this kind of like, you know, like it's either a fine line to walk or it's a juggling act, right? But I think sort of those visual presentations you're showing of density really help us understand the look and the feel and how that translates to where does this, you know, the numerics of what's on the slide you've got there right now. So I think that's what we're going to ask people to be thinking about really as a task force. What we want you to think about is look at these character areas, look at some of this data and sort of think about, well, if you had to play with the chessboard, where would you put this and what are the implications that we create with that in terms of, you know, traffic flows, experience in neighborhoods, the look from the road and so on.
And I think that's a really good point. And when you think about what is the intent of a comprehensive plan, what do you want and where does it go is really kind of that fundamental question. And we've talked about this a little bit and we'll continue to talk about this over the course of the week. One of the main tools of a comprehensive plan is something called a future land use map. And what that is saying, here's where we think particular uses, kind of as a community vision and as a city, here's where we want to direct certain types of uses on the ground 10 years from now. And that's that has teeth behind it in that helps guide future zoning for the city, that helps to guide permitting and development approvals. So that's something that has some lasting impact. And part of our process for arriving at that future land use map are those illustrations, are those kind of initial designs that we've shown you so far in the different character areas. So right now, that's the hypothesis of what the future land use map is going to look like. It's more schematic and it's just kind of testing these concepts with you all, but that's kind of the step in that direction. And you can review those character area maps that again, will eventually morph into that future land use map online. And maybe some of you, actually, I'm a little curious, maybe by show of hand, and I'll just scroll through, raise your hand if you've seen those character area maps online through the story maps feature, which I'm going to get into in a moment. If you don't mind just kind of raising your hand if anybody's seen it so far. So we've got a couple, and really, if you're raising your hand, that means you're probably on the planning commission. So right now, the elements that we're talking about today, and those kind of conceptual land use maps in the character areas are all public information, and they're posted on the planning website, which we'll show you the link at the end of the presentation. So that's something too to kind of look through in more specificity, and that's a kind of a living, breathing kind of document where we're continuing to update that over the course of the planning process to a point of once that gets kind of finalized and we have the input we need and we have the approval of the community and of the city, that kind of gets locked in, and then that turns into the future land use map. And then kind of the last element of the comprehensive planning process is the how, and some kind of top level strategies for the city and for the community as to kind of how to set the conditions so that we actually arrive at those future land uses.
So Leslie, did you want to just throw this open to general questions now? Because obviously this is, you know, you're going to need time as a task force to dig into this, you know, trying to understand this a little bit further. And obviously we have some homework, and we are going to run a couple of community discussion sort of topics. So we want to get broader input from the community as well. So we want to have some of those run between now and the next task force meeting. But really, you know, between now and the next round is really the time to kind of noodle at this, ask the questions, you know, think it through, you know, try and visualize it. But should we, Leslie, just open this up for any sort of general questions or comments at this stage?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I stopped sharing my screen so that I can see everybody, but I'm also happy to pull up any of the diagrams or photos back from our PowerPoint.
And it might be helpful, I was thinking maybe to put the moving forward discussion slide on too, to help frame particular questions. So again, we'd love any reactions, big or small. Particularly, is there anything that's been said that seems off course? Is there anything that's been said that's kind of not zeroing in the right direction, especially as it pertains to housing? Some other questions that again, feel free to respond to any type of question, big or small, but some other questions to really keep in your head are there any voices or perspectives that we really haven't reached? And again, we're trying to make sure to reach the city staff and leadership, planning commission, the community at large, youth in particular. But we really want to make sure that we're getting all types of perspectives, especially if there's really informed folks, or especially if there's folks that's hard to reach. But so are there any perspectives we're not capturing? Are there any just concepts that we're not thinking through adequately? Is there any red flags that are happening, or any just general thoughts that you'd like to share with anybody? So with that, I'd love to hear any thoughts, big or small.
I have a question.
But there was no mention of any tiny homes, which is a pretty big movement in housing. And I actually attended the Veterans Community Project house today down at Union Station. We have a pretty large tiny home village in Kansas City. That ground has gone to being worth $1.5 million. And in the last 2 weeks alone, I have had 5 clients ask me about building a tiny home on some type of property or something about this. And I know we have a large development of shed houses and stuff like that going in a little bit outside of some of these corridors, but I think this tiny home thing really is potentially going to fill a void in housing in terms of movability, affordability, all one level living, all of this different kind of stuff, but I didn't hear any mention of that. And veterans included in a group I didn't hear a lot about today.
So that, I love that point. That's a great point. Do you know what the minimum home size is that's allowed by zoning currently in Smithville? Do you happen to know, Leslie, offhand what that is, approximately? Sorry to put you on, if you don't know that.
No, Jack, if I'm incorrect in any of my statements, please feel free to correct me, but within the R3 zoning district, which is that highest residential zoning district, I believe the minimum square footage for a 1-bedroom unit was 900 square feet of floor area. Is that correct, Jack?
Tiny home, I mean, you can do those tiny homes on a 900 square foot floor plan. That's probably bigger than double the size of like the ones down on Truth, but you know, it's a great conversation.
Well, that's and exactly, and not just so, and kind of my point with that being not that, oh, that means that we have to conform to this 900 minimum, but more of right now, there's a very traditional suburban rural zoning in Smithville that really restricts many of the units, the type of density that we've shown. And so kind of through this process, I think that what your comment really speaks to is making sure that the future land use map and the guidance to the city ends up in zoning flexibility that allows for things like tiny homes in appropriate places, that allows for things like multifamily development that right now is pretty restricted by current regulations.
If I can, just to clarify one issue, the square footage that Leslie mentioned is accurate. However, we do have a conceptual overlay district option that was created by the Planning Commission in 2014, and it allows building sizes to be varied, but it has to be a part of a bigger plan. So there is no limit on how low they can go. It just has to make sense, and the Planning Commission has to.
Perfect. I think that tiny home concept is right on. Another phrase, I don't know if anyone's familiar with, when you think about providing more flexible options like tiny homes, is often accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, is another very common term that's been popping up more and more, especially in that time that type of like incremental development idea where you can have an additional dwelling unit that's maybe on your lot, but a smaller kind of shed cottage style. There's a phrase that goes around called granny flat or a granny cottage, where the idea of like your grandmother could, or your mother-in-law could live in your backyard and in their own independent home, but on your lot. And again, that is a way of increasing density and providing more and different types of housing units that might meet needs.
Yeah, and more affordable. Actually, that's as an aside. That's something. So we're based in Washington D.C. That's something that Washington D.C., which as a whole, is its extremely different place. There's very few parallels, but that's something that a number of towns are looking at as a way to promote not only flexibility but also like much more affordable types of housing in the town.
The other general questions or comments, and as we've been clear, this is a journey of discovery, right? We're trying to translate what we heard in the visioning and what people have expressed appetite for, translate that into a land use map and these sort of notions of character areas and guiding principles, and your direct assistance here is to help us make that translation so that we come out with something that passes the straight face test when it goes out to the community. That it's like, people look at it and, oh yeah, it makes sense, right? That reflects what we want. So, and as John said, if you think we're off track anywhere, or we're not capturing it, or we're missing a piece, we really implore you to let us know, right? Because we're trying to discover what it looks like, right, in the future. So.
Any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, it is, Josh, and I would just echo that. I think a lot of this does make a lot of sense with where I see the community growing, especially when it comes to single family further north, and then higher density to the south. If for no other reason, just because of the transportation options are limited in Smithville if you don't have a car right now, but given proximity to the southern areas, to I-435 and the airport, there's a whole lot more possibilities for mass transit development in that corridor than anywhere else.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And that's one thing that we will be looking at as one of those overlay issues, is that whole traffic flow. Because obviously, a whole bunch of houses at the north end. Well, people are going to more than likely come from the south to the north and back. Every time they do a trip, right? So because part of what when we particularly start talking about the downtown, is trying to think about how to create that, slow people down at that point of where Main Street intersects with the 169 and so on. So things like traffic flow, all that sort of stuff, that's what we're that's the Rubik's Cube we're trying to put together. So.
We have a question about annexation, which frankly, actually there's a couple questions about that we've received about the large data center that's proposed just south of Smithville, and that concept of kind of major either events or industries coming into Smithville and nearby is something that we're going to be addressing during tomorrow's task force under kind of the concept of demand drivers. So what are certain things that we have kind of these projections based on past trends, based on projections from other sources, based on permitting, development, based on a number of aspects. But there's a number of things that we know that could change this somewhat dramatically. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what those aspects may be and what the city's role may be tomorrow. And then also tomorrow we're going to we'll talk a little bit more on the concept of annexation, which to my knowledge is something that seems to have, at least in our conversations, pretty widespread support. It also has pretty widespread unknown in terms of if that's even remotely feasible or likely, at least from what I've been exposed to. But it does provide some really interesting implications, especially actually in terms of the unknown, especially in terms of annexing closer to Smithville Lake, but potentially also more to the west. But anyway, those are some issues that we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow.
All right, so any final questions or comments? All right. So Leslie, do you want to just set us up for the next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, perfect. So I think everyone should be able to see my screen now. As we think through again the next steps in this comp plan process, we obviously are meeting with all of the task force groups this week. We plan on re-engaging all the task force in about a month, around kind of the end of August. There will be a lot of information put onto our portal, our comp plan portal, which we'll show the link for if anyone hasn't been to that portal yet. We'll then be revising and drafting our comprehensive plan so that we can get additional feedback and start the approval process. Specifically, when we think about the time between now and the end of August, we've definitely given a lot of information out there, talked a lot at you all, but we really want to see from your perspective too, what are you looking for in Smithville over the next 10 years? And we kind of have a little digital assignment or a little bit of homework, so to say. That would be fantastic if, as task force members, you can help inform us on what you want to see, either by taking photos of developments that you might see in other areas of your city or region, especially outside of Smithville, since there's not as much of this typology so far. Or you can also find photos online about the types of housing that you'd like to see, specifically thinking about this idea of density, thinking about how some of this new typologies could fit into the 169 South area or within that infill downtown area, increasing that downtown community oasis. And we'll have additional instructions on the comp plan portal too for how to kind of upload some of these photos or email us these photos with a little bit of descriptions. And then, as David mentioned earlier in the call or on the discussion at the beginning, we'll be using that portal group to also provide kind of a series of online discussion groups and areas where you can provide more comments and feedback too. So if anyone needs a link to the comp plan portal, it's through this bottom URL. You can also access it too through Smithville's city website. There's a comp plan section that does link to the Future IQ portal.
And Leslie, if I can just add,
findable by Google. If you just Google Smithville Comprehensive Plan, you'll.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, if you're on follow Smithville Facebook page too, we post all that, all the discussion topics and everything will be posted there.
By the way, I want to give a shout out to Max, who's grilling and making me very jealous in terms of what's going on his screen.
All right. So I think Leslie, was that all you wanted to cover?
That's all I have on my end.
All right, fantastic. So
I'm going to close out.
Yeah, great. So great job, Leslie. Thank you for walking us through that and setting the context. You know, obviously, this planning is a science, right? And so we're doing this translation between vision to the science of planning, and this is a really important interface in that process. So just a quick thank you to the Planning Commission, of course, for their support. Gavin, if you're still there, thanks for helping us set up with the Performing Arts Centre. Linda, thank you for handling the IT. Jack, thanks for keeping us all on track there. So we hope to see you on some of these other meetings this week, if that's possible. But obviously, we'll be continuing to engage with you. So thank you very much for your input. As I said, we'll be posting that stuff tomorrow. Let's keep this rolling and keep sharpening the narrative about the future for Smithville and the comp plan. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leave some for me, Max.
Chicken and brats, come on over, everyone.
Oh, that sounds pretty delicious right about now.
You're saying that channel tomorrow?
Yep, that's exactly right. And really,
Linda, is there anything else you need from us tonight?
Nope.
Are you set closing everything out? Sounds great. Thank you so much for all your help getting this set up and teed off today. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.